Terry McLaurin is a no-show. Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media, Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. Don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. I have a few stories up now, including the topic I just referenced, which is Terry McLaurin holding out. I also have a story up there talking to Mayor Bowser. Hopefully you listened to the podcast because I thought she was pretty insightful about the entire process with the whole name situation, with the president's posts on social media, but also with the council, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyways, so go give that a listen and go give it a read on ESPN.com. I will be writing or having camp updates every day for ESPN.com. We have little files that they'll post every day. And I will be doing a podcast after every practice throughout training camp. And for you Gold members, I'll be doing a private Zoom very soon. Got to figure that out, but within the next couple of weeks for sure. Got a lot going on, so I've got to make sure my head is above water before I can get back to those because the workload starts to really, really, really increase right about now. And it's okay because it's football. Let's go. Anyways, one more thing before I get there, and I don't have any, want to hold up my bottle of Huel, the black edition, but I'm out. So I've ordered more and this hasn't come in yet, but it's what I need right now. It's perfect for right now, folks. It's 40 grams of protein, 27 vitamins and minerals. And listen, when training camp starts, I got to leave the house. I have to leave the house early. So sometimes I don't feel like making something. Much easier to pour my Huel Black Edition, the strawberry banana, the chocolate, into a little glass with a few ice cubes, and I'm good to go. So anyways, if you want to get that, go to huel.com, use my special code Keim, Keim, get 15% off for new customers. You got to see the rules and conditions, etc., but go check that out. Anyways, let's get to, I'm going to do 5 thoughts today. Of course, a lot about Terry McLaurin because he did not report to the team today. Today is when all the players reported. They reported at 1 o'clock. They had a conditioning run at 3. Found out about 4 o'clock I was hearing earlier that he probably wasn't there, but officially found out around 4 o'clock today that he indeed was not there. So he has decided to hold out. I wondered if he might try a hold. And now there are pros and cons to each, right? If you're holding out, now it's a $50,000 fine for every day you miss. It used to be in the past that the teams could waive that fine. Well, in the new CBA, you can no longer do that. They're trying to discourage holdouts, partly for a couple of reasons. One, because it's coming out of the players' pockets, but also to discourage them. Like if it's coming out of their pockets, you would think they'd want to get in, but also to lessen the occurrence of injuries to players who hold out. But if you're holding in, one of the things that agents will tell you, in fact, I have a story going up Wednesday talking to people for an agent. I have a story up Wednesday on ESPN.com about holdouts, but it's from multiple perspectives, what it's like for the player, for the agent, for the GM, for a coach. And yeah, there's some the Redskins stuff because it was Trent Williams. And so that's Jay Gruden. He's in there. Talked to Trent's agent and a couple other people about this. So, but one of the things you can talk to agents about the hold-in is a lot of times you don't want your guy in there because what happens? Well, the team's around him now that you're not there with him. You're not able to maybe filter some things for him. They're bumping into coaches. They're bumping into others. They have teammates there. There's more of a sense that you want to get things going. So if you're in there, it can also work to the detriment, even though you're not getting fined. So anyways, McLaurin holding out, and there we go. He was clearly frustrated last week. So I think I was on Craig Hoffman's radio show today, and he asked me, like, back in March, would I have anticipated this? Well, no, not back in March. I don't think I would have. Certainly after minicamp, yes, I did. Because, whether it was a holdout or hold in, I didn't think they'd get this resolved before training camp because it definitely felt like there's a gap. And then when you find out they did not talk to one another, or there was no, they didn't talk for a month. And when you hear that, like, it's not going to get resolved before a camp. It becomes difficult. So that's why, and McLaurin last week said, if there's no progression in the talks toward a deal, then he was not going to be on the field. So he stayed true to that. And Terry, they say that one thing, Terry is very resolute. He's a determined person. It's why he's blossomed as an NFL player. and he has a strong belief in himself and what his value is. I think if he did not, we would not have seen him do what he did going from at Ohio State, where he had to a couple times work out for Urban Meyer just to get that scholarship, and then you turn yourself from that to a special teams guy to a key contributor later to a third round pick to a guy who has been Washington's best receiver since he was drafted here in the third round in 2019. So that's why he's going to, if you talk about a guy who's willing to bet on himself, it's him. And the other thing that helps players do that, they've made a lot of money. Like back in the day, they didn't make this kind of money where it was harder to do that, right? So, anyways, all that plays into it. So, how damaging could this be? Well, it depends on how long this goes. That's duh, So, I think that's, again, with these fines are one thing, but if he's willing to accept the fines, because again, he's made a ton of money, then that could go on for a while. Keep in mind that Adam Peters was in San Francisco when they went deep into camp with Nick Bosa a couple years ago. He was there when Deebo Samuel was a holdout for a little bit. So he's been part of this. You've seen it. The Niners have had several guys like that, and they all go to the end of camp. They end up coming in, and things work out. So I do think things eventually work out, but that's a think, not a know, because until you know, you don't know. But I think it will, because for a couple, clearly these sides need each other. Like they are better together. And I've always said that. We know what McLaurin means here, and we know what he means to the team. We know what he means to the locker room. And listen, like this is a good situation for him. But anyways, so let's go over some of the bad things here. He means a ton to the locker room. Like he's not, it's funny because like he's a very popular player, but he's not one of the guys like Bobby Wagner was more, he'd go around the locker room talking to, a lot of guys and all. Terry is very respected. He gets along with all these guys. When he gets in the locker room, his locker is like right when you turn in. So he pretty much stays at his locker, and there, the trainer's room, whatever. So it's not like Jaden bounces around the locker room. A couple other guys do that too, Jeremy Reeves. But Terry's a guy, but gets along with guys, right? It's not like he's a loner. There have been other guys who have been loners. I wouldn't describe him that at all. He is very respected, and I think that matters. So you want to make sure that guys who are respected get taken care of. And I think, that again, that's a key factor. Also, this team wants to win. Like they think they can take that next step. That next step, based on reaching the NFC Championship game, is going to the Super Bowl. Now, you can go in the season and say, are they really that? Do they have that kind of roster? Well, kind of hard. Like the Eagles have that roster because they've won it. They've been there. They know how to build. They're further along. But if Washington gets to the playoffs again, you have number 5. You think anything can happen because it almost did last year too. So, but the bottom line is that's what their sights are set on, and it should be. Like, why wouldn't you think that? This would obviously impact that if you don't have Terry McLaurin, which is why I think eventually they will have Terry McLaurin. And keep in mind, he's under contract for this year. So at some point, if he doesn't return, he's going to not get paid. So I don't think that anybody wants that for him, right? I don't think he wants that. That's why I say eventually there's a financial element here that matters to these guys. And so I think that's why it eventually will get done. It's just a matter of when and how do we get to that point, and will McLaurin, what is going to satisfy him in terms of the contract? Because that clearly is something that they haven't come close to yet based on his reactions last week and what he's doing now. So the good side, there's a good here, right? The good part is both sides want to be in business with one another. Like McLaurin wants to be. Why would you not want to be here after all that you've gone through? You have a young quarterback in Jaden Daniels who you could be with for the rest of who you should be with for the rest of your career, and you can be very productive with. He was highly productive with them last year. Catches and yards very similar to what he had. The touchdowns were up. The red zone production was up. They looked for him there. So that all matters. So you've got that young quarterback to play with. That's a bonus for him. You have a strong owner. You have a strong power set up here with owner, GM, coach. So you're going to more likely than not be in a position where you can compete in the playoffs. For a guy who didn't have that early in his career, that matters. Again, you have stability at and all sorts of places that you never had it before, or competency in places that you didn't have it before. That helps. He's also beloved here in the community. I don't have to tell you that. You know that. Not like he couldn't go somewhere else and be well liked and respected and beloved, but he's here. And it's like it's hard to get them. When McLaurin has a one catch for two catches for 20 yards here, listen, man, it's usually going to be like, why didn't they get him the ball? Why didn't the OC call more plays for him? Why didn't the quarterback throw him the ball? You go somewhere else for that, and the questions become different because you have a different, you have more money in the bank here in that regard, and it's just easier. It doesn't mean he wouldn't be liked, respected, and loved somewhere else. It just means he's really entrenched here with that. And how much does that matter to both sides? I think it does. And so I think like that's a part of it too. So I think that plays well in this favor. We're miles away from any sort of demands on anything or anything like that. I still think they'll be in business together when the season rolls around. Um, his work ethic, I think, is something that you want in this situation. That I was talking to, if you remember, Walter Jones, Hall of Fame offensive tackle, and he was one of the guys I talked to for that story. And one of the things he talked about is how he had three different holdouts, and each year he came back and made the Pro Bowl, and how you had to really be self-motivated to really kind of handle this because you're away from your team. Yes, you can go work and all that. It is hard to duplicate what's going to happen in training camp, like as far as the pace of the play. And one of the things that Debo Samuel, if you remember I did the interview with his trainer from the offseason, Nick Hill from Exos, a week or two ago. And one of the things he pointed out was like how getting Samuel ready for what the pace that Washington plays at. So McLaurin, the good thing for him is he knows that pace. So can you adjust your workouts accordingly to make sure you're matching up with that so that when you do come in, you're not huffing and puffing, and not that he's definitely going to be in shape, but you have to be in shape to play at the pace that they want to go. There's a lot more no huddle, et cetera. So like they led the league in no huddles by far last year, by far. So you have to get to that point. I have zero doubt that McLaurin will stay in shape throughout this process. He's a guy that, every offseason, I've talked about this a number of times. What are you going to work on this offseason, Terry? Well, this offseason, I want to work on contested catches. I want to work at, the point of, at the top of my routes, how I get out in and out of breaks, how you get off man coverage, et cetera. He works on not just contested catches, but off target throws. So all that stuff, he does that every offseason. He's highly motivated and he works on what he needs to. That's why I have confidence that he'll be in here. When he comes in, he'll be fine. But I do think the pace of play is something it's at least he has an idea of that. And I think it'd be harder for Samuel to duplicate it or replicate it away from here as opposed to McLaurin, who has gone through it. So that's a benefit. I think the other thing is um, he's worked with Jaden Daniels for a year. I think that is a big help too. So that he's got familiarity with them. They have a rapport. They have a really good rapport. And it's why it's funny because last year, the first couple of games, McLaurin didn't do a whole lot. If you remember listening to me at the time, I wasn't all that worried about it because I knew the work they had put in. I saw in training camp. And like, for example, when Jahan Dotson early in camp last year before they traded him, he wasn't getting it done. He wasn't getting any work, or there was no connection with Daniels. And you could see like whatever they're saying, this is what I'm seeing. Well, with McLaurin, you saw it. You saw the connection. And I talked to Terry about this. You knew that there was a strong connection there. So you weren't really worried about like, hey, it's a good connection. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of when. And that's what it did. But those two will communicate by text all the time, talk to each other off the field. And I think like that's something that I think helps. So it's another benefit to the situation. Also, they're in the same offense. That's one of the things again, going back to the Walter Jones conversation, one of the things that he told me about his situation, he had the same coach, he was in the same offense. He said if he hadn't been in that, he would have made it more of a point to go into camp because he had to learn all that. Terry knows all this. So for those looking at like, is the world sky falling? Well, no, it's not. So at some point, could it be? Yeah, sure. If it's later in camp, is it a couple weeks? I know Bram thought it would be 1 week. He'd get panicked. Like I'm at a few weeks. If you're not in by around the second preseason game, now it's a big trouble because what's it going to look like when you do come in and you don't have as many practices together beyond that point? And so it's not about playing in the preseason as much because these joint practices are going to be more for the starter. We'll get the starters will get more work in the practices more than the games, but you do want to make it to one of those for sure if possible. So, anyways, the other thing to know in all this, Washington, like that age is a deal, right? Whether or not you think it should be, and I know a lot of people just pay him whatever he wants. That's a hard business model to use. You want to have some level. I think you have to understand what Terry means. You have to understand who he is and what he means to this team, and you have to take that into account. But I think for them, what they are also taking into account, like it's not just that he's going to be 30 this year. He's already being paid this year. He's under contract for this year at age 30. The extension would be 31, 32, 33. So they have to figure out what could it look like in a couple years, and then what does that mean to them? Whereas if you're McLaurin, you can look and say, yes, but I've only been in the league 7 years. There are some guys like Mike Evans got paid after his 10th year and he's still producing. So he can certainly make a case, but this is an analytics driven team, and analytics show what happens to receivers at 30. Doesn't mean it's going to happen to McLaurin. Analytics show going for it on fourth down, it works. Sometimes you don't sometimes you don't make it because the analytics aren't foolproof, right? So, anyways, but that is part of the deal here for sure. Number two, Adam Peters has experience in these situations. I brought it up. So, I will say he said the right things today during his press conference. He said that they're talking, that we had recent conversations. He talked about how, McLaurin, like you always have to keep in mind what a great player and what a great person he is and not lose sight of them. So that way you end to be very straightforward and honest, to negotiate in that allows you to negotiate in good faith. And I think those are some of the things he's picked up along the way at various stops: New England, Denver, San Francisco, and of course last year here. So I think he said all the right things with him. You're not going to go out like I didn't expect him to not say the right things because it's just what they do. They're not going to sit there. They haven't wanted to talk publicly at all about this. And I can tell you, like, they're not saying a whole lot elsewhere either. So they've been very quiet because they want to keep it. They want to keep a lot of that stuff out of the media and just do it behind closed doors. I think that's obviously, as a media person, well, you'd love to know. But but the way to run an organization, that's not a bad way to do it. So, but he did say, keep in mind that this is a great player, great person, and you don't want to lose sight of that because that's at the core. You are dealing with a person. You are dealing with emotion. Like the emotions are the hard thing to really kind of let go of, and it's really easy to say, oh, just let the agent handle it and do this, but this is your livelihood. There are some guys who just want to be really involved in the process, want to know everything. Some guys don't want to know everything. It's just again, case by case basis, right? But I just think, with Terry, it's funny because again, I was talking to one of the agents and he had Jarvis Landry, and Landry I don't think he was holding out, but he's looking for a new deal. And he's an emotional guy. He's like, you have to handle the emotions. Trent Williams' agent had to handle his emotions. Now, different types of emotions, but you have to that's what they had to do, because when you're dealing with guys who have that play with that passion, and Terry's not going to go out and pop off. Like that's just not a stop. But you want to make, it's just part of it. And the emotion can be like, why aren't they valuing me the way I see myself? Like that's where it's also hard too. So it's such a, I don't, that's why it's always been tricky. But it's also why it can be very hard for a player. Like again, Trent Williams' agent told me, he's like, don't do this if you're not willing. Talking about in general for an agent, he goes, my advice to an agent is don't do this or a player, don't do this unless you're willing to go all the way. And I will say, like I said, if there's one player that you think is like, this is what I'm prepared to do, I'm willing to do it because this is how I value myself, it's McLaurin. But the other part too to know in all this is that Peters and Josh Harris is aligned with what they want to do. Not that he doesn't want McLaurin in here, of course they all do, but he demands more information than most owners probably do. So whatever you're doing, like you want to do this, okay, why wouldn't we pay McLaurin this? Okay, why would we pay him this? Why would we not do this? He's going to get all those questions answered before you proceed forward, because if you can't answer that, then there's problems. So anyways, it's just it's such a it's an unfortunate situation, and I think obviously for both sides you hope that they have to hope that it gets resolved relatively soon and without a lot of pain because you don't want a top player like that going to the locker room feeling like he's anything except taken care of. That's going to matter. All right, number three. So let's talk about something other than Terry McLaurin and Stadium or whatever else. Okay, let's get to some other because there's obviously a lot of excitement. This shouldn't overshadow what is going on with the organization, how they're coming looked at going into camp, and just what is going on here. So there's a lot of other stuff. It's not just Terry McLaurin. It's not just this, the stadium name, whatever it is, because again, well, that's for a whole other podcast. So I'm not going down those roads. This is about what's going on here. This is year two for Jaden Daniels, and this year two for guys like Mikey Sammerstall. And it's funny because one of the things Dan Quinn talked about with those year two guys is the jump that they often make, like right. So like he singled out like a guy like Brandon Coleman moving inside the guard. He'll be spend all off season at guard, all training camp at beer guard. That will make a difference. But also a guy like Ben Sinnott being in year two, how much does that help him? Does he come in with more confidence than he did, or and play differently, and maybe have more of an approach that they want, right? So like all that can happen. But the one thing Quinn said, and the guys like Jordan McGee is a guy that I talked about this with Bram the other day that I'm really looking forward to seeing. I think he's going to be a key player in his backup role. But with guys like Daniels and Sandstone, one of the things Quinn talked about on Tuesday during the presser is like you talk about the year one to year two jump, but he said those guys made their jumps during the season. That's rare. And you saw it with both. Like you saw it with Daniels and the way little things like just again keeping your eyes downfield when you're scrambling to look for maybe another throw outlet, whatever. Little things like that, and just the speed with which he operated. Sam was still going inside to outside and adjusting. There were some routes early in the year that gave him some problems. Even like in the Bengals game, we gave up a long one. It's like, hey, watch for this, and then you get suckered on a route. Well, the next time you face it, you're not getting suckered. So like that's progress. Like those guys learned early during the season, and I think like that's where you can feel really good about how these guys can develop because both of them are going to be key players here for a while. Sanders still looked really good this spring, so he's another guy I'm curious to see how he watched. The O-line could be very good with Tunsil. Let's see how Connolly looks. Coleman inside. When does Sam Cosmi come back? They keep saying he's hitting all his markers, but when does that come? When does he come back? 9 months is October. So anything before that is pretty quick. But he is, when you watch him out there, he looks good, but there's still more tests to pass for sure. So D-line depth, I know they don't have that one big stud, but I was talking to some coaches the other day, like that's going to be a really hard place to cut. Like you may end up losing some guys that were key parts of their rotation at the end of the year, whether it's like guys like Jalen Holmes, Sheldon Day, like where is the room for all these guys? I had to do a 53-man roster and I had 10 D linemen on the going into camp. First of all, I hate those 53-man projections because there's a lot we don't know yet, but it was hard to like who you taking off out of that top 10. Like I know they like Javante Jean-Baptiste too. Like, Jacob Martin, you brought him to be a pass rusher. Yes, you just signed Von Miller, but you like to have those pass rushers available because Von Miller is 36 years old. There's a reality to guys being 36. If you brought in Jacob Martin to be a backup edge rusher, well, that's what you can still do. So it's going to be a hard place to cut for sure. And I think that's what you want. But that's why I say the depth is that much better. It's just a matter of how good will the unit be, the starting group, but the depth is certainly there. And it's funny because like there are definitely holdovers from that team last year that Eagles game rubbed them the wrong way. It wasn't so much just that they lost, it's how they looked and that it was to the Eagles. Like that really chafed more than a few guys in there for sure. So number four, they have some magnets on this roster, in this organization, people who can attract other people. Part of the reason Von Miller is here is he wants to play with a guy like Jaden Daniels because, as he told Nikki Javala, like he went from Josh Allen, Buffalo. You're not just going to go somewhere where you don't have a quarterback, right? This is a guy that yeah, you're going to get paid. You also want to win. Like, why would you come back at this stage to not win? So you have a guy like Jaden Daniels. as Dan Quinn said, people are going to want to play for this guy, which is absolutely true. Like you heard this, I heard this throughout the year. Doesn't mean they go out and get every free agent, but if they're guys they want and it's things are close, like for example, DeMarcus Lawrence, well, he was offered a multi-year deal elsewhere instead of a one-year deal here. Well, that's going to make a difference for a guy at that stage. And but short of that, guy like Jaden Daniels is going to make a difference. People will want to be here with him or stay here with him, right? Like you can attract. I don't. Again, Von Miller is not coming here if he's not here. Bobby Wagner is not coming here last year if Dan Quinn isn't here, who hired Ken Norton Jr., who has a really good relationship with Bobby Wagner. So like those things matter. If they had hired Ben Johnson last year, Bobby Wagner's not here then either. And I don't know if half those guys, I don't know. I don't think Zach Ertz is here either. So guys who are key contributors at a certain point in their career, they want to play for this coaching staff. And I think like you have that. So it's just in such a different spot than it has been at any point that I've covered because you have guys that are draws for other people. And they have multiple types of those guys. In the past, players would come here for the money. That's it. They could talk about like, oh, the Redskins history and all that. Folks, they were coming here for the money. Like at a certain point, that history got pushed to the side because they'd stopped winning. But the money was always was the lure. And so now you have, yeah, the money's good, but you also have this, you also have that. Or, like down the road, if you're a receiver, let's say they don't work something out with Terry down, like whomever, like even if they work it out with Terry, you're still going to want to get another guy opposite him. So at some point, if you, let's say down the road, a couple years from now, you have to get a receiver. Well, Jaden Daniels is going to have several years worth of film out there or numbers out there. Receivers going to say like, I want to play with that guy because he can help me get paid for my next deal. So that all helps. Anyways, the reputation of this place obviously is far different than what it used to be. Yes, players are going to see how they handle Terry for sure. Like they want him to be taken care of for sure. There is no doubt in my mind about that. If you don't like, Jaden Daniels is not going to come out and say like, they got to get him in here, blah, blah. He'll handle it the right way because that's what he does. However, if you don't think a quarterback doesn't want the best receiver in, well, of course he does. These guys all want it. But there's also a lot of other ways for them to measure this organization. They're not as myopic, say, well, if you don't pay Terry, this place stinks. That's not how they operate. Like this, the locker room, when we go in the locker room, it's so much nicer. You've seen some pictures on social media. They used to have just like basically like folding chairs in front of lockers. Now you have really nice cushiony chairs that fold out. You got nice storage place. It's just going to look far different. The facility is much different than it was a few years ago because this ownership group has invested in them. So all that stuff also helps as well. So yes, they'll be paying attention to Terry McLaurin, but they've also paid attention to A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J along the way. I didn't say K. And maybe that's where K. I guess K and L because McLaurin with an M. So anyways, point is there's other stuff that they're paying attention to in addition to this. But yes, you want to see your guys get taken. You want to see the leaders and the best players get taken care of. And that's when I talked to Jay is like, asked him about Trent Williams back in the days, like, guys you want to pay, left tackles, receivers, guys who make plays, quarterbacks, defensive ends. So anyways, there you go. Number 5, I'm really looking forward to seeing the one-on-one battles in camp. So I'm going to wrap up on this one because let's talk about training camp. And this is now the first few days, obviously, we're not going to see anybody in pads. So that's going to take several days. So you're not going to see the pads, but you'll see some one-on-one work. But as we get into the one-on-ones, it's the Von Miller against Josh Connolly. That's going to help Connolly's development. But it's not just him. And even Quinn talked about this. He's so huge on competition, but it's true. Deron Payne against a Brandon Coleman or Johnny Newton against Brandon Coleman. That's going to be fun to watch. Javon Kinlaw against Brandon Coleman. That's going to be fun to watch. Trey Amos against, I want to see him against McLaurin, please. Because that's the kind of guy that he's going to have, like, you want to measure yourself. That's who it is because they don't have that. Noah Brown will be good for him to go against. Debo, yes, but Debo moves around so much. He's a different kind of receiver. So I'd like to see him against a Terry McLaurin, a top NFL receiver, because that's what you brought him in here to cover. Those are the kind of guys you want him to cover. What does he do? That's why, like I told Craig Hoffman, I'll chip in an extra $5-10 to this fund for Terry because I want to see that. I want to see that battle because that will help Amos get better for sure. I want to see how Marshawn Lattimore holds up for sure. And just how is he driving on routes? How is he looking against guys? Again, I would love to see him against McLaurin because those are the kind of guys that he has to go against. We're going to see Sammer still go against Debo in working in the slot, wherever. We'll see the outside guys go against Debo, but again, he's a different kind of guy. So it's not necessarily one for one where you're going to see these are you want to see him against McLaurin to see then how might they do against an AJ Brown, against Malik Neighbors, those kind of guys, right? So anyway, I want to see how Laramie Tunsil goes against Dietrich Wise, and just yes, he's better than Wise. I mean, in terms of the career numbers, et cetera, the career accomplishments. But Wise is a professional defensive end. He's a smart guy, a good defensive end. How does Dorrance Armstrong look? Because I thought he was solid last year. Can he do even more, maybe a little bit more this year? Jalen Lane, what does he look like? So there's a lot of things to really look forward to watching, in addition to seeing when does Terry McLaurin come in? Because there's a lot else going on, and that's going to be the focus because that's what we're going to be watching, folks. So, anyways, again, I'll be back on Wednesday, later afternoon, wrapping up the first day of practice. I appreciate you tuning in. Thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you next time.